Well, as the snow continues to fall here, we're joined by Rick Valdarchi. Now, Rick, we've been talking a lot about the precipitation that we continue to get here, even though we're into the second half of April, and the city, of course, announcing their plans for flood prevention. What can you tell us about, first of all, what the likelihood is of a repeat of what we saw last year?
Well, Erin, what we experienced last year in terms of risk was identified as a 1 in 100 event. It'd be nice to say that we've got 99 years to wait for the next one, but unfortunately, that's not how a 1 in 100 is classified.
Okay.
Really, what it talks about is the risk of it happening on an annual basis. So there's a 1% chance again that we're going to have a similar event. Low, but certainly not zero.
Okay.
We often get asked about the snowpack, its influence on flooding, and certainly the snowpack contributed to the problem we had last year. But really, it's a big, massive dump of rain in the wrong place like we experienced. And we really depend, from a water perspective, on that snowpack to provide us with that supply through the summer, which really is when the demand in our system is high, to refresh our reservoirs. So the snowpack in itself can't cause a flooding issue. It's really when you get that bad combination that we experienced last year between an intense rainfall event and the time of the year when the snow's coming off the mountains.
Okay, that's good to clear up. Now, when we talk a little bit about the plan that the city put forward, what does that entail, or can you give us kind of the Coles Notes version on it?
Well, from a prep perspective, in water we prep for runoff, and runoff is that combination of rain and snow melt, and typically the period that we where it can, the most intense period that can occur, and when we get the most rain really is between the middle of May and the middle of July. But we prepare for that every year, and that preparation from a water perspective really is about taking a look at our infrastructure. Every year we go through maintenance activities specifically on our storm network. So you'll see our crews in various communities cleaning the catch basins, making sure the catch basins can convey that storm water during an event. So that's one element. We also get into, and one thing that gets lost is how well our water treatment plants performed last year. Because in the middle of all this, we were still able to provide great quality water like we always do to Calgarians, and yet it's under the most trying conditions. The water carries a lot of dirt and puts our plants under a lot of pressure. So we go through a very vigorous process of making sure the plants can perform to that standard. As respect to specifically other things we're doing this year, obviously the level of anticipation is pretty high. We have gone through our emergency response plans. They have been augmented to reflect what we learned from last year. And our expectation this year is we're going to be just as successful in delivering on that plan as we were last year, but including what we learned. Parts of that include, I think it's been conveyed in the media, we purchased 217 flood tubes. Those flood tubes really help us execute on that emergency response plan quicker because they replace, in a lot of cases, sandbags and dirt berms that we had put out previously. We are also, from a perspective of infrastructure, we've put in, for instance, automated storm gates in Sunnyside. And the purpose of those gates is for us to respond quicker when we see high flow events.
What about along some of the riverbanks there? Some of the priorities we've seen, some of the work being done on Memorial Drive there?
Yeah, great question. You can imagine after the event from last year, an incredible amount of damage from an erosion perspective, both on the bow and elbow. And the first thing we need to do was assess the damage and start prioritizing projects. And we identified a half a dozen that were critical. And by critical, I mean really the river bank had reduced any protection, or it was vulnerable to the point where it couldn't protect our infrastructure any longer, really susceptible to further erosion. So really that activity that you see is all about stabilizing the riverbank. And for the critical sites, which we had 6, 4 of the riverbank, the stabilization process is completed. We still have to get in there and do some landscaping and revegetation. But now that the critical sites, and there's 2 more that are still underway, but we're progressing into the high priority site.
What's the number one thing you want Calgarians to know about the work and the preparedness of the city of Calgary?
Well, we're always, first of all, there's a tremendous amount of work that will continue. It won't end at the end of or the middle of July this year. It's ongoing. We've already done a bunch of stuff. One small thing of interest is we've recovered or we've removed about 24-ish tons of debris out of the Elbow River. We're up to, I think, 20-ish tons out of the Bow, and that's not even done yet. But really, our work, in some respects, is only beginning. And what this has taught us is that we as a corporation need to consider this in our strategic planning of an event like this happening in the future, and how are we going to put in plans in place that are going to reduce the impact of something like this happening in the future, which I really hope doesn't happen for quite a long time.
I'm with you on that one, Rick. Thanks for taking the time today.
My pleasure. Thanks very much.
You bet. We're going to be back with more on flood prevention and what the city's doing a little bit later in Go Calgary. Stay with us.